Alright guys, so oh, gotta put this sideways. So today we're working on a 2004 325 Ci, and we're doing a few things, but in this video I want to specifically show you some tips and tricks for replacing the expansion tank. So you're gonna see I have them side by side here. This is an original one, I believe. Yeah. And this one is going bad. We're at right over 150,000 miles. The new one we're putting in is a OEM manufacturer. The company is Bear. Good quality. So the reason I bring that up is because when you're replacing the expansion tank, it's one of those parts where it's very important to get an original manufacturer part. Don't get one from AutoZone or O'Reilly or whatever the case is. Highly recommend getting either original or an original equipment manufacturer. Another thing to think about and consider is the coolant level sensor. Since we are replacing the expansion tank, I also went ahead and got a new sensor as well. This is a genuine BMW sensor from the dealership. And real quick, while I'm taking this video, I might as well show you how it goes in. So you'll see there's slots on each side. You'll simply slide those slots in. There is a keyway for it to line up. So you'll slide that in. And to tighten it, you're actually going to turn it counterclockwise to the left. And our sensor is now in. You can install the expansion tank with the sensor already in. So our new one did not come with a cap, so you will have to swap the cap over from the old one to the new one. These sometimes can leak, so you want to inspect it and confirm that these O-rings on there are not torn or broken. Just check my packaging to make sure. Yep. And then there's a few more tips before installing, but before doing that, let's go over to the car and take a look at some simple things here. So here's the car that we're working on. And obviously, I'm sure you guys are aware, here's where the expansion tank sits. So you can see I have my coolant catch bucket at the bottom here. I do have a rubber plug over this bottom here because it was leaking water. Tried to save that, but we're going to take that out. Two things to mention: the expansion tank is pretty easy to replace. There's only a few things you need to disconnect. The connector for the coolant level sensor, which is actually right here, and to release this, there's simply a push tab where you push and it releases. So you'll need to unplug your coolant sensor. You'll have one radiator hose coming from the coolant pipe right here. I have mine tucked away. That's going to go to the middle of the expansion tank here. I like to fold it up and tuck it away to prevent as much coolant pouring out as possible. And then you're also going to have the upper radiator hose, which I did the same thing. To prevent coolant from pouring out of it, I simply fold it up here. This is not going to do any damage or anything like that. And then lastly, it clips in on the bottom here and kind of goes around these two sections right there. That is held on by a simple clip, very similar to the hoses, the coolant hoses. You will pull this clip, that will release it, and you can pull it up. When it's pushed in, that is snapping it in place. Now, there's a few things you want to do beforehand, before installing this, that are going to help make it an easy process and make sure everything seals up well. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you get the connections where the expansion tank sets in. You want those pretty dry for the most part. You don't really want to get it contaminated with coolant or anything like that. So I'm just going in there with a rag, kind of wiping it down a little bit. You can spray brake cleaner if you want, but it's not necessary by any means. Okay, so I have that area cleaned up. And before installing, there's one more thing that might help us out a lot, or a little bit, that I do on every cooling O-ring, whether it's the O-ring of a hose or the expansion tank itself. So I'm gonna set my camera up here and I'm gonna show you guys. So like we were talking about, this little snap ring is what holds the connectors in. And you simply just push it on, and there's O-rings in here that will see. So what I always like to do is get a little bit of motor oil, just a little bit, and you're going to coat the O-ring in a little bit of oil. And what this is going to do is it's going to help it slide in and snap into place a lot easier. Another place I like to do it is where the upper radiator connects, as well as that other coolant hose that I was showing you. Just put a little bit of oil on this plastic because there's a couple reasons. The coolant hoses, like I just talked about with the expansion tank, they're literally secured on just by a O-ring that's sitting in there. So if this O-ring is dry and you're trying to push it on a dry plastic, you run the risk of it not seating properly, damaging it, ripping that O-ring, whatever the case is. And if that's what happens, then you're going to be dealing with a leak. It's the same with the upper radiator hose here. It's simply just an O-ring in there that seals up, and you don't want to be forcing that on dry. So to be even a little more prepared, we can now bring the expansion tank over. And I'm also going to bring my oil over here. And I don't have a stand, so I'm sorry about that. So I'm gonna try to do this all with one hand. I'm gonna get a little bit of oil on my finger here. See here, just a little bit of oil. And I'm also going to do that on the bottom here where the expansion tank plugs into. Like I said, this is just gonna make sure that we're not pushing anything on dry, risking tearing stuff and whatever else. Now, the last thing that you want to think about is there's a little knob on the back of the expansion tank here. Let me set this down so I can show you guys. This knob right here. That knob is going to go in this little slot right there, so you do have to line that up as well. So once again, before getting it in there, I'm going to lubricate these O-rings a little bit. And now, what I can simply do is drop the expansion tank down into its place here. Like I said, you want to make sure that you're lining up, stuck on this power steering hose. I just got to get past that real quick. Cap, there we go. Like I said, you want to make sure that little tab or that knob that I'm pointing at goes into its little slot right there. So as you see, as I pull it back, it's going to go lined up with that slot. Now all we're doing is lining it up with those two holes at the bottom. So I'll go under here. I can look up, hopefully. Okay, there's the bottom of our expansion tank. Let me put it in 0.5. So one part is going to line up with the other. The other side of the expansion tank is lined up on there. Now, since you have everything nice and lubricated, you have everything lined up properly, all you're gonna do, and what I personally like to do, is you can see how there's movement in this whole bracket. Sometimes it's better to support the bottom of the radiator and bracket with a jack stand, or sorry, a jack, very lightly, because what'll happen when you try to push down this reservoir from up top, you'll be pushing down on this, and you kind of need to support that. So what I'm gonna do is get my floor jack here, and you're gonna want to have some padding. You don't want to just be jacking it up with the metal part. So I'll put down this rubber pad, and I'm gonna ever so slightly jack up on the bottom area here where everything kind of sits. And I'm not really gonna put pressure on it because I'm not trying to lift anything up. I'm just trying to add some support so that when I'm pushing down on this reservoir right here, it's not gonna be given leeway from the bottom. So all I have to do now is push. You guys probably heard that snap. That's the clip in there snapping in place. You can go ahead, push it down a little bit more. Like I said, you want to make sure that it is completely sealed. And from there, make sure you're in your tab, which I am. I know it's hard to see. And now from there, I'm just gonna give it a couple good pushes. This we don't need here anymore, obviously. gonna go back underneath, make sure everything is connected well. And it's gonna be pretty obvious if everything's seated. I know it's hard to see, obviously, on my angle or from the camera, but just from visually seeing, I can see that it's completely seated in place on both ends. While we're down here, we can go ahead and plug back in our coolant level sensor just to get that out of the way so we don't forget. And we'll now move back to the top. So lastly, like I said, we have this hose here, which actually sits right in this little slot for it. So I do need to go ahead and move this. Now, another important thing before snapping it in, just like we did on the expansion tank, what I like to do is get just a little, all you need is a little dot of oil on your finger. Go in, get access to that O-ring, and oil it up. This will save you guys, I promise you. And like I said, you can do the same thing on the plastic part where the hose actually connects to, and go ahead and plug it back in, and you'll see how easy it snaps right into place, just like that. And lastly, we're going to do the same exact thing with the upper radiator hose. Again, just a little dab of oil on your finger, literally just a drop. There's the O-ring right there. See, get your finger in there, oil it up a little bit, and simple. From there, you can snap your rings back into place here. Simply line it up. And this is hard to do with one hand, but look at how easy that was. Literally snapped right into place. They're seated perfectly. We're gonna have no leaks. And that's it, guys. That is an expansion tank on the e46 M54 M56 motor. I was able to do this in one shot video, so I'm just going to go ahead and upload this clip. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the description. I know it's a pretty straightforward job, but these are a few tips that I've been using over the time that has helped me with this a lot. Because I'm sure if you guys have experience replacing this, then you know it's pretty hard to get the bottom to seat. You can be dealing with leaks right after. So hopefully this will help some of you guys out. But yeah, that's where we're going to finish up this video here.